There we go. All right. So, the difference between Europe and America is profound in many ways, but in mobility, in transportation, the difference is unless you've lived in Europe, you don't understand or you don't appreciate how much America relies on cars and trucks, and trains and buses are somewhat of an afterthought here in the United States, when in Europe they are the lifeblood of the transportation mobility network. And so we're going to talk about today corridors, mobility corridors, and how they're playing a major role, right? Because as America pulls out, when a stabilizing force pulls back, systems don't remain neutral. They reorganize. Vacuums don't stay empty. They attract new gravity. So, you can see throughout history an external anchor weakened, internal structures begin to reform around what still works. And, you see this in the aftermath of war. What's working? Movement, in terms of movement, coordination, connectivity, and trust. So power doesn't relocate through speeches or treaties. That's just ornamentation. Power relocates through infrastructure, through logistics, mobility, energy flows, and capital circulation, and human movement. All right. So in a fragmented world, sovereignty increases. So in a fragmented world, sovereignty increasingly expresses itself not in slogans, but in who controls the corridors that move people, goods, data, and opportunity. When those corridors align, gravity concentrates, power concentrates, new centers emerge. Economic ecosystems reorganize around them. And so this isn't theory. It's how complex systems rebalance. When the old anchor gets pulled up, when the stabilizer fades, the real question isn't whether gravity will move. The question is where it will settle next, and who is structurally positioned to carry it. And that brings us to infrastructure corridors and the quiet emergence of new centers of coordination. And this is essential to understand, because there is a massive geopolitical shift that's happening for many reasons, and we've outlined them in Act 1 through 4 of Gravity, of our series here, and our series Gravity Shifts, and this is Act 5, right? And we're going to talk about how infrastructure is geopolitics. All right, infrastructure is geopolitics, and it shapes global order. So let me get my first reference slide ready. Right. So infrastructure just isn't economic. It's a strategic asset that underpins national security, connectivity, and geoeconomic influence. When traditional stabilizers weaken, when America pulls out, right? When America pulls out of Europe, when America pulls away from NATO, from the World Health Organization, from something like 66 different councils and groups, global warming or whatever it is that was sort of this world global tree hugging thing America's pulled out of. So when traditional stabilizers pull out, right, infrastructure becomes one of the main levers a system uses to reestablish its internal coherence and cohesion and external competitiveness. And so we see that here expressed in this article, From New Global Order to Infrastructure Development, What Challenges Await Europe. Experts now define major infrastructure not just as public works, but as a strategic asset, essential to national security, economic autonomy, and geopolitical integration. So, in Europe's Rebalancing Act, infrastructure is where power gets exercised, and that comes from We Build Value, and this article right here. Point number, and all of these articles are linked in the description, which I have to, in the past episodes, I've been a little bit laxed in getting those links in there. Point number two, transport and economic corridors create new centers of gravity, and France was one of the first ones very early on with their Le Train Bleu and their overnight trains, wagon-lit, their overnight trains to the French Riviera. That was a corridor. Enshrined in luxury and excitement, in preparation, in an introduction into the trip, in the ceilings and the walls and the paintings in Le Train Bleu, a restaurant which is at Gare de Lyon. Then you'd come out of the restaurant and you would take your overnight train to the French Riviera, and that's a very early and very early illustration of this idea of a mobility corridor and the power that has in the imagination and in actual economics and reality. So the European Commission has explicitly formalized transportation corridors, transport corridors, integrated infrastructure networks that stitch together regions, economies, and supply chains. Corridors are not neutral infrastructure. They are the connective tissue. They're the connective tissue of adaptive power systems. And we say that here in this European Commission report. The European Commission's core network corridors are designed to boost competitive, efficient transport and future-oriented connectivity across multiple countries. Europe's own transport policy redefines corridors as the means not only to move goods, but to advance economic strategic integration. When the old stabilizer weakens, corridors becomes the new scaffolding of systems and stability. And so what does this mean, right? What does this mean for hotels that will host the beginning and the end of this corridor? What does it mean for air charter companies who will bring people in to these corridors and to add as act as a support feature to this network, which, as Europe goes through its birthing pains and as America pulls out and it sort of is reborn and redefines itself, who are the companies that are going to lead and not just service travel, but service the actual corridor, the mobility corridor that they are bringing goods and services to. So, case in point, this isn't just theory, this is actually happening. While Ukraine was this $500 billion black hole that Europe, men and materials just vanished into the zombie apocalypse black hole. Whatever you think politically, whether it's an illegal war or however you want to position yourself politically, the fact is the Ukraine war changed Europe forever. It showed, it exposed the fissures, the cracks in the facade that were already underlying the NATO and the European Union. And so because that these fissures have grown so deep and so large and heavy, they're saying with Greenland, if there's any sort of movement where the Trump administration aggressively goes to annex Greenland, they say in an instant that's the end of NATO. Like if NATO sends, troops and dog sleds to Greenland, NATO's over with. So the example of the new gravity in Paris is Le Grand Paris Express. Let's give it up for the Grand Paris Express. There we go. So this is the Grand Paris Express. 200 kilometers, baby. 200 kilometers of, that's like doubling the metro infrastructure, plus high-speed rail from right here, from right there, which is Charles de Gaulle, Le Bourget, and Orly. All right, so these airports where travel times used to be, anywhere from like 2 hours if you get stuck in traffic, those travel times are going to be reduced by half. So from Charles de Gaulle, you're going to get to the center of Paris in like 35 minutes. From Orly, from La Bourget, you're going to get to the centre-ville in like 15, 12 minutes, 11 minutes. So this is a huge investment, like $50 billion, 68 new stations, and so as Europe looks to find its footing, it's infrastructure projects like this, it's infrastructure investments like this that will provide a center of gravity as people are searching for something, real to hang on and to move investment capital towards. So infrastructure can already be seen forming. Forming a new center of economic gravity in Le Grand Paris Express. And this is not something pumped out by the TGV. This is something, a report created by Harvard University. The Grand Paris Express is not just a metro project. It's a transformative strategic mobility network that reshapes how people, ideas, jobs, and capital move around Europe's most influential cities and regions. The Grand Prix Express is one of Europe's largest infrastructure projects, expanding urban mobility, connecting suburbs, and fundamentally redesigning metropolitan and connectivity at scale. So right now, one of the largest, right now, the Grand Prix Express is not just building transit lines, and so that's the important thing to understand. It's creating new economic nodes, or they call it clusters, connecting business hubs, research clusters, airports, residential areas into a coherent mobility ecosystem that didn't exist here before. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about, just to wrap it all up, system loss, right? U.S. is pulling out. It's pulling out of the World Health Organization. NATO is weakening. It's falling apart. So when the old externalizer, when the old anchor leaves, a system's old axis of stability becomes unreliable. Okay, so Europe is going to look for reliability. It's going to look for connectivity. And so what I'm proposing is we're going to see a reformation in complex systems. When an old stabilizer fades, internal structures must reform. It's the natural order of things. Nature abhors a vacuum. So internal structures must reform, but not randomly, but around practical, functional assets like connectivity and mobility. And so infrastructure becomes sovereignty. People often think sovereignty is politics, but in the 21st century, sovereignty is increasingly expresses itself in connectivity, logistical networks, energy integration, talent mobility, supply chain resilience. Strategic infrastructure binds these together. When infrastructure flows, so does economic gravity. And we have a hard time understanding this. When this is our reality, right? This is America's high-speed rail. So we can't imagine that engine being a economic engine. Okay, here it comes blazing. This is probably topping out at maybe 60 miles an hour. Well, now that's going through a train station. It's probably going at maybe 40, 50. Okay. Now take a look at what European trains feel like. There you go, baby. 300 kilometers an hour. Look at that. You see the difference? You see the difference? Just in terms of technology and look, feel, and speed. You can't compare the two. Excuse me. And so I'll leave you with the overnight train was, now that we have trains that go, 300 kilometers an hour, an overnight train isn't necessary. But the overnight train was an innovator in terms of defining a mobility corridor. And so we're going to take a trip back to the days of old, and we'll call it the broadcast for today. All right. So thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time. All right.
You look beautiful tonight.